Today we're going to talk about leads. Is that right?
Leads.
We're talking to our data expert, McKensie Worley. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Digging Deeper into driver recruiting. Kenzie, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you're an expert?
Why I'm an expert? Because David says I am, that's why. No, I got my PhD in psychology, which really experimental psychology was my focus. So it was on research and data analysis. And then once I joined the team here at Randall-Reilly, I started digging into the data that we've got access to and just kind of fell in love with it. And that's what I do all day, every day.
All right. So the idea here that was I was trying to think about how do fleets, or the people we talk to, how do they actually think about leads? And what I came up with is this. Essentially, you can talk about it by cost. How much does a lead cost? Source, where did it come from? And then type. And I've already forgotten the order that this presentation's in, so let's see where we land. All right, so cost. So my theory is that most fleets tend to think of it like, how much does the lead cost? And then where did I get it from? So that could be like, what channel did it come from? What vendor did I get it from? What job board did I get it from? And then they say, okay, this particular placement or whatever gives me the lowest cost leads, so that's the best. Have you seen that? Did I just make that up?
No, that's what we see very frequently, and understandably so. I mean, we're all looking to get the cheapest advertising cost per hire that we can get, so it would make sense that you would go for the cheapest cost per lead that you can get.
I'm going to hide my cursor. It's annoying me.
You don't want it waving at us?
Anyway, all right.
But yes, so that's what we most often see.
All right. So you have a particular, let me check the next slide, see if it's, okay, it's the one I want. All right. You have a particular, McKenzie did a bunch of, I don't know which camera to look at. McKenzie did a bunch of research at looking specifically at correlations and how things correlate with cost per hire, which I know everybody in every camera is interested in. What can you tell us about cost per lead and how it correlates with cost per hire?
So our theory was that cost per lead probably wouldn't correlate with cost per hire, even though most people tend to think that it would. Most people think get the most leads at the cheapest cost and you're going to get the lowest cost per hire. Just from our experience working with different sources, just because a source produces cheap leads doesn't necessarily mean those leads are good quality. So we tested this by running a giant correlation study like you see. We had over 600 campaigns across like 6 different months and actually found practically a negligible correlation whatsoever. So
can you do a quick, and if this part gets too dry and nerdy, we'll just edit it out. Can you do a quick explanation of what this number means? Because this, if you're not a data nerd, this may not mean anything.
Yep. So if you were to think of it as a scale of 1 to 10, or in this case, like 0.1 to 0.10, with 10 being something that is there, a relationship is there, 1 being a relationship is not there. Obviously, the closer to 1, the less of a relationship there is. And so a correlation of 0.26 means there's practically not one at all.
Not one at all. I don't know if we can use that. But, so which is a bit mind-boggling. You would think, since leads are so associated with, who you're hiring, you would think cheaper leads would have some sort of correlation with how much it costs to hire a driver. And a 0.26, as I understand, basically means no correlation whatsoever.
Basically none. So I think about it this way. I don't know if you have any experience buying purses, or maybe shoes would be a better analogy, but typically you get what you pay for. So if a pretty cheap purse, you're only paying 10, 20 bucks for it, probably will last you a couple months, maybe can't even carry like all your stuff in it. If you pay more for a nicer purse, you're going to get better quality out of it. Same kind of thing with leads. So just because they're cheap doesn't necessarily mean they're good quality, so you may not get a hire from them. There's a reason that they're cheap.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So this, rather than cost per hire, this is your lead to hire ratio. So how many leads do you need to get before one of them turns into a hire? And we actually did find a decently strong correlation between that and cost per hire.
All right, so lead to hire is essentially, like you said, how many, just restating what you said. So then that would make me think that the most important thing that a fleet can focus on would be reducing your lead to hire. Or essentially, instead of it taking 80 leads to get one hire, if you could get that down to 60 leads to get one hire, that's going to have the most drastic compounding effect on your cost per hire.
Yep.
Dun, dun, dun.
That sounds exactly right.
All right. Let's move on. Unless you have more things to say about
I think we
cost.
covered it.
So, like I said, I feel like the way most people think about it is they think, all right, here's the cost, which is crazy to think that, and I'm being redundant here, it's crazy to think that most people are thinking about cost of lead when it does not correlate in any way to their cost per hire.
Nope. It has as low of a correlation as like CPM does. So,
which is cost per 1,000 impressions. All right. So, like I said, I feel like the way people do it is they think about cost, then they relate that back to a source. So, do you have any insight or in-depth data into how people think about source, or why you should think about source, or anything of that nature?
There is some value to thinking about source. We know certain sources are going to be more expensive or less expensive just by kind of how they're set up, how their pay structure is.
Let's give the folks at home a what we mean by source. You see it up here, we got channel vendor placement, but that still may be a bit abstract. So when I say channel, what I always mean by channel is like Facebook or job board or Google or
YouTube.
Even Google's a bit umbrella, because then you got like YouTube, search, display, all these things. Yep. And then vendor, obviously that's the person you're working with, your agency, your whatever. So how do you think people, in your experience, how do fleets, which of these three things do they kind of think about it more so?
I would think most people tend to start by looking at it by vendor. Right. So they're going to look at all the different vendors that they place business with. They're going to see which ones typically get them the cheapest cost per lead. From there, they might take it a step further and look at specific channels. Like if I'm placing business with, even Google directly can be a vendor. So maybe I'm placing business with Google, but the different channels could be Google Display and Google Search. I might go one step further and look at it at that point. But I would say that's probably where most people stop, is either at the vendor level or at a different channel.
How important is source? What should people be looking at here?
Same thing that we just talked about. Rather than cost per lead, lead to hire ratio by source is important. So if it takes me 200 leads in display to get a hire, but it only takes me 25 in search to get a hire, that's something important to consider. That being said, sometimes that's just the nature of the placements.
Right.
It's always going to take a lot more leads on display to get a hire. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ever run display, because there's value in having your brand visible. And
well, also scale. Like it's hard to produce, the volume that you need necessarily with one placement.
Right, exactly. So those are important things to consider, but more so than cost per lead, it should be lead to hire ratio.
Right. All right. What's next? I forgot. All right. So then we talked about, let's do a quick recap. So we're talking about the different ways you can look at leads. So we talked about cost, not correlative with cost per. Hey, there goes Nick. Nick was going to be on this video, but he refuses to be on videos. And we just missed him.
He just gave us a look like I escaped that one.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about, back to the video, we talked about leads by cost, we talked about leads by source, and now we're going to talk about leads by type. So we're talking about all the ways you can kind of quantify leads and how you should go about deciding what makes a good lead, what makes a bad lead. All right. So we've talked about cost and source. Now we want to talk about type. And spoiler alert, I feel like this is where most fleets miss the boat. Miss the boat.
Yep, I'd agree with that statement.
All right. So when we talk about type, lead type, we're talking about like the format in which the lead comes in. So you got inbound phone calls, you got short forms, you got some people want to get like the full application, and then you got like like a job board or a multi-carrier. So it's not necessarily a company specific app. All right. Why is it important to think about it by type?
Well, for one thing, different recruiting departments, just by their personality and their strengths and weaknesses, are going to be better at converting different types of leads.
Can you give me an example of that without mentioning any names?
Yes.
But if you do say a name, we can edit it out. But
yes,
give me an example.
So I know a recruiting department that has one person who handles all of their inbound leads, outbound leads, orientation, processing, training. I mean, literally one person that does it all. That person's not going to be available to sit on their phone and handle inbound phone calls all day, every day. So instead of getting inbound phone calls, they work better with either inbound short forms or really preferably long forms. They definitely can't handle multi-carrier leads because this one recruiter can get to about 25 leads a day. Multi-carrier, you'll get that in like an hour. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What is the average, if you can look it up, what is the average lead to hire rate for an inbound phone call?
Since January of this year, we're looking at an average lead to hire ratio for phone calls of 17 to 1. So 17 inbound phone calls before one of them results in a hire.
All right, let's look at that compared with forms.
Forms is 40 to 1.
Woo! All right, what about multi-carrier leads?
Multi-carrier is 240 to 1.
So, if type, so just to bring all the logic together, so the most predictive that we've identified in our data, I don't know why I'm doing my hands like this, the most predictive that we've identified in data of what's going to drive your cost per hire down is your lead to hire rate. And on average, people's lead to hire with inbound phone calls is 1 in 17.
1 in 17.
Compared to 1 in 40
with short forms.
With short forms compared to 1 in 200
and 40. 240 for multi-carrier.
For multi-carrier. So that would tell me that the most important thing you should be thinking of, even before vendor or placement or the channel you're using, is the type of lead that you're getting in.
Correct. Yes. And to take that a step further, the type of leads that you work best are going to influence the channels that you place on, the vendors that you work with. So naturally, Facebook, for example, tends to generate more short forms than it does phone calls. Well, if you are fantastic at converting phone calls and you place all of your budget in Facebook, you're not going to get the amount of phone calls that you need. So,
let me ask you this. Have you ever run into a fleet? I think I've heard of this. Have you ever run into a fleet that actually converted short forms better than phone calls?
I have. It's rare, but it happens.
In that case, it would be the opposite. You would, I mean, since, certain channels are great at getting report forms.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so if you think about it as in type first, how would you relate that back to cost? Like thinking of it as in like, well, I would convert these the best. What if I convert phone calls the best, but it cost me so much money to get phone calls? Would you think that I should maybe go away from them, or?
You'd have to weigh the difference. So if you could take how much it costs you to get a hire from a phone call and take into account how many phone calls it takes you for one to become a hire, balance those two. If at any point the cost outweighs the effort, then you might go with cost over effort. But most of the time, lead to hire ratio, sticking with whichever source has the lowest lead to hire ratio is going to be your best bet.
So there's another aspect to this that I think we've touched on, but we haven't really talked about. I think it's the next slide. Which you can edit it out if it's not the next slide. Okay.
Yes.
So another thing that we've pulled from our data is the fact that we talked about recruiter productivity and its strong influence on lead to hire ratio. So if lead to hire ratio is the most correlative with cost per hire, what correlates with lead to hire the most? And what we found was, well, why don't you do the punchline, even though it's right there.
It would be about 450 to 600 inbound leads per recruiter per month.
And what we found was that when you got outside of that, when you overloaded them, that their lead to hire ratio drastically got bigger.
Yes, it did. So if you think about, let's even take the high end of that, 600 leads per month per recruiter, that comes out to about 125 a week, which is about 25 a day. So that's about what a typical person could handle, because every single inbound lead typically initiates 3 to 10 outbound leads. So if you're getting 25 inbound leads, at the low end, 3 outbound leads for each of those, that's 75 outbound contacts that you're making as a recruiter, plus the 25 inbound per day. You just can't handle much more than that.
Wow. All right. So let's sum this all up real quick. So I keep saying so a lot. Can you cut out all the so's?
I'm going to highlight every one of them.
Great.
With a counter at the bottom.
Alas.
I have a so counter.
That's what I'm going to switch to. Alas. So anyway, all right, so the best way to think about it, if we're trying to get the best cost per hire possible, the best way that you should think about it is think about it by source as it relates to hires. But next, think about recruiter productivity, because we can't overload our recruiters. And then lastly is cost, maybe. When we're talking about leads, this is leads. So when you're thinking about leads, think about what source gives me the best hire, what source can my recruiters handle because of recruiter productivity issues, and then finally cost.
Yes.
So all you people out there that are going, which is the cheapest lead and which vendor gives it to me or which channel gives it to me,
throw that out the window.
Throw it out the window.
Throw it out the window.
And that's not all. We're going to be sending everyone that took the time to log into this video series, and we're going to send you a worksheet so that you can look at your own lead to hire by response type. I did that wrong. It shouldn't be source, it should be type. We'll cut all that out and fix it. We'll digitally fix it. So it should be type, hire, recruiter productivity, and then cost. All right. But be on the lookout for our response, hire rate by response type worksheet. We'll be sending that out to you.
So when I was reading that, I was thinking you were saying, look at the source, how it relates to hires and recruiter productivity while using lead to hire ratio and response
Yeah,
time
that's what I
in the
meant.
background.
No, it's just a typo.
Yeah.
We'll fix it. Maybe. And the reason I put maybe up there is because not everyone can do that. I mean, sometimes you just got to work best with what you got.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand that every fleet's differently. But according to the data, the best way to look at it is first you need to be thinking about lead type, which lead type gives you the best hire, and then does your recruiting team or you, because I know many of you out there are the recruiting team, which one do you actually have the time to work with, and then maybe relate it to cost. But really, cost isn't the big
Cost
thing.
is a thin.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for digging deeper into driver recruiting. We wanted to call it Digging Deeper with Dave, but I think this is where we will end it here. Where's my clicker? Where'd the clicker go? Oh, you don't do it at the end? And
Cut.
can't believe I butchered the last slide. Still rolling?
No?
How'd my bald spot look?